Levy Care, a man who has seen plenty of trouble in life, takes a deep breath as he drives his brand new Lexus through the winding streets of Silver Pins, an upscale community known for its calm and serenity. It had been a long, tiring day in court, one that had tested his patience and willpower. But now, as the cool evening breeze filtered through the open window and the soft melody of jazz enveloped him, he felt a familiar peace. His work as a judge often exhausts him, but the journey home is always a time of relaxation and reflection. Levi is no stranger to challenges. His path to becoming a judge was not easy. As a young man of color growing up in the inner city, he had to fight every step of the way to succeed. His years in law school were difficult, and even as he rose through the ranks, he faced discrimination from people who didn't approve of someone like him holding power. However, he overcame this problem thanks to his belief that justice is for everyone, regardless of race or origin. His achievements show his tenacity and determination. Levi relaxed and smiled, feeling the comfort of the plush leather seats as they drove past the grand homes of Silver Pines. His week-old Lexus is more than just a car. It was a symbol of everything he had worked hard to achieve. The sun began to set, turning the sky orange and pink, reminding Levi of simpler days before the weight of responsibility was placed on his shoulders. However, when he intended to increase the volume of the jazz pass, the red light and blue from behind drew his attention. When he looked at the rearview mirror and saw a police car approaching, his heart was dragged. He felt a familiar alarm on his chest. He was convinced that Levy did not exceed the speed. In fact, he drove at a slower speed, enjoying the slow rhythm, but the stories of such encounters he had heard were too many and weighed heavily on his mind. Of course, not here, not in its own region. Reluctantly, Levy turned on the turn signal and stopped on the side of the road. The police car approached. The flickering lights disrupted the peaceful atmosphere of the neighborhood, casting a cold, flickering light onto the quiet streets. Levi's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, and a sense of dread began to spread. He told himself who he was, a respected judge and a man of authority. This must be a misunderstanding. However, a hard knock on the car window made him flinch. Levi turned around to see a tall, broad-shouldered female police officer standing at the driver's window. His face was cold and emotionless. License and inscription, his voice was firm, without greeting or explanation. Just an order. Levy frowned with confusion, but still obeyed the documents in the box and gave them. She grabbed it and looked only at him, then back at him, her eyes testing him with an awkward look. "Get out of the car," she ordered in a voice as hard as a rock, leaving no room for resistance. Levi blinked in surprise. "Sorry?" he asked in a calm but confused voice. "Get out of the car," she repeated in an even stronger voice as she put the gun to her side, her posture indicating that this was not necessary. Levy felt his heart rate, but he was calm. He met such a situation early, but he did not become a judge. Levi emerged from his office with the manuscript of a letter he had written the night before, planning not only to send it to the local newspaper, but also to share his story with people he trusted, co-workers, friends in the community, and equal rights activists he had worked with for years. He knew that publicity surrounding the incident would provoke a wave of public opinion, even criticism, but he also understands that silence only perpetuates the injustices faced by people like him and his children and grandchildren. Mina was sitting at the dining table. The cup of coffee in front of her had gone cold, but her eyes were still fixed on her husband. "Are you sure you want to do that?" she asked, her voice not trembling, but full of worry. Levi gestured, putting his hand on his wife's bear. "You have got to do this, Mina. Not fair for him, but for Malcolm, Olivia, and all the kids who developed up with the same discussions he had with his child. In the event that you do not stand up, at that point, who will?" She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "I'm always with you. But be careful, Levi. When you make these issues public, it's not easy to forgive them." At the courthouse that day, Levi met Captain Reynolds within the corridor. The captain's confront flashed with weakness, but it too carried something like regret. "Judge Kerr," Reynolds began in a somewhat pleading voice, "I personally want to tell you that I have requested an internal investigation into Agent Rose's conduct. However, I would also prefer to keep the matter confidential to protect the reputations of both parties." Levy looked him straight within the eyes. His gaze was hard. "Captain, this is often not a matter of notoriety. This can be fair. I was so utilized to the guarantees of noiseless activity behind closed entryways, but this time it has to be brought to light." Reynolds sighed and shook his head. "I understand your perspective, but I also want you to understand the pressures that I and the police are facing." "Then let this pressure become a force for change," Levy responded before entering the courtroom. That evening, Levy formally sent a letter to the region's major media outlets. It included both a copy of the vehicle title and a detailed accident report. The letter ended with a phone call. We can't alter a framework on the off chance that we fair unravel it independently. It's time to confront the reality that covered-up inclinations exist all over. And on the off chance that we do not act nowadays, the another era will proceed to endure these treacheries. Levy hit the send button. A feeling of relief mixed with anxiety washed over him. He knew that from that moment on, everything would change. Within the days that taken after, his story started to spread. Articles showed up on the front pages. Interviews were sorted. Individuals within the community started to talk out. A few steady, a few doubtful. But the vital thing is, the occurrence is not covered up. During the subsequent community meeting, Levi stood in front of the crowd. His gaze wiped out the waiting people. When I got to be a judge, he said in a profound but resounding voice, I swore to guard equity. But equity cannot exist as it were within the courtroom. It has got to begin from the way we treat each other, from the way we see the esteem of each human being. The whole room listened in silence, and in that moment, Levi realized his struggle had found a voice. Levi gestured, his eyes unfaltering as he sat down over from Captain Reynolds. The weight was mounting on both of them, but it was clearer than ever that the discussion was now not close to a single officer's activities. It was around holding a complete framework responsible, a framework that had permitted treacheries like this to rot for far away as well long. Thank you for organizing this, Levi said, his voice firm but respectful. But we both know this is not just a press conference. This is to ensure that we never back down. The public has a right to know the truth. Reynolds sighed, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his temples. You're right. The department was under the microscope after it was broken. The community is divided, and it is difficult to control everything. That's how it is in small towns. People take sides. And when you have a judge in the middle of it all, things complicated. Levi's gaze did not hesitate. I don't ask you to clean it under the carpet, Captain. What I am asking for is responsibility. Real responsibility. The captain met his gaze wearily. I know, but you have to understand that this is not just about an officer. It's about everything that goes with that kind of projector. Admitting this could damage the agency's reputation. People could lose trust in us, and we could have a worse reaction than we were prepared for. Levy leaned forward, his voice growing quieter and firmer. It's already broken. People of color have been facing this problem for generations. Do you think one accident can repair the damage? This city is only just beginning to wake up to the truth, Captain, and you can either help them face it, or you can stand by and watch it get worse. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of the ticking clock on the wall. Reynolds stared at the table in front of him, clearly grappling with his own internal struggle. Finally, he exhaled abruptly. I'm going to hold a press conference, but I want you to understand that once this becomes public, there is no going back. You will not just face a media storm. This will run through the department. People may not be as supportive as now. Levi nodded, clenching his jaw. I know, but it's a risk I have to take. It's not just about me anymore. We're talking about all those who have been pushed to the margins of life for too long. Reynolds rose slowly, the weight of what was about to happen weighing on his shoulders. Okay, Judge, I will do it, but I can't promise that it's easy. Levy also stood up and nodded slightly. I didn't come here for something easy. I came here for a change of pace. As Levi left the police station, the weight of the days ahead weighed heavily on him. The press conference marked a turning point not only for the town of Winterdale, but for the very concept of justice. He did not know how the community would react, nor how the press would frame its words. But he knew one thing: he had to express himself. The truth is very long, and it's time to hear it. The day of the press conference has arrived late this week. Levi stood in front of the camera in the camera. The room was packed with reporters, the air was filled with anticipation, and when the first question was asked, Levi knew this was going to be the most important speech of his life. I am holding this press conference today because I can no longer ignore the truth, he began, his voice calm but filled with subdued passion. Last week, I was racially profiled by a police officer in my community. I understand that many in this city may be uncomfortable with what I am about to say, but I believe it is time to acknowledge a painful truth. This is not simply the actions of one officer, but a system that has allowed such incidents to happen too often. You cannot claim that everything is in place. The reporters remained silent, watching carefully as he continued. What happened to me was a much bigger problem. A system that does not always look evenly. A system that too often turns a blind eye to the voices of those who have been marginalized. And I am here to say that this must change. We can do better, and we must do better. The questions began to come in fast and furious, but Levi answered each one with conviction as he spoke about the need for accountability, reform, and new ways of thinking about law enforcement and justice in Winterdale. When the meeting was over, Levi felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He said what needed to be said. Now the real work begins, facing the backlash, dealing with the consequences, and continuing the fight for justice. Later that night, as Levi sat with Mina at the dinner table, the kids once again surrounded them, the tension from earlier in the week still lingering. But there was a shift in the air now. There was a sense of something new, something greater than any one person, and Levi couldn't help but feel a small spark of hope. No matter what happens, Mina said, breaking the silence, you did the right thing. Levi nodded, his hand finding hers across the table. I hope so, but no matter what, I'm going to keep fighting, to face it head on. As the days passed, the momentum continued to grow. Levi not only became a voice for change in Winterdale, but a symbol for the countless people who feel marginalized, ignored, and neglected by the institutions that are supposed to protect them. He was invited to speak at rallies, public meetings, and even national conferences, where he continued to share his story and push for reform. His message was clear. Change is not just necessary, it's inevitable. But as his authority grew, so did his problems. There were still those in power who tried to silence him in order to minimize the real problems he exposed. The threat has worsened to him, and the anonymous phone and emails have become more hostile. At one point, the brick was thrown out of his office window. There is a terrible reminder that his fight for justice is not without results. Despite fear and uncertainty, Levi claimed to move on each step forward, regardless of the small one step to the best future. Mina was with him every step of the way. There were moments of doubt, moments when his heart felt like it was going to break under the weight of the struggle, but she always reminded him why he began this journey in the first place. For his children, for their future, for the hope that their world could be better than the one they inherited. One afternoon, Levi sat on his table and signed the documents and memo for the next performance. When his phone exploded from a message from Captain Reynolds, he had just finished his call with a local activist group. The message was brief but reassuring. We are working on a racial bias training program. It's not perfect, but it's a start. I'm on your side. Levi smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his efforts were producing tangible results. He was no longer alone in this fight. Not only the mayor, but other actors in the system began to listen and understand that the status quo was no longer acceptable. The next day, he returned to City Hall and met with city officials to discuss the proposal's progress. This time, the atmosphere was different, less tense and more collaborative. Levy's suggestions were taken seriously, and the room seemed genuinely focused on finding a solution. The mayor's office has already started developing new policies, and the police department has begun implementing some of the changes Levy suggested. But even with these victories, Levi knew the real work was only just beginning. Changing laws and policies is one thing, but changing hearts and minds is a much harder task. It will take years, if not decades, to dismantle the deep-rooted biases and prejudices that have been ingrained in the system for generations. That night, as Levi and Mina had dinner with their children, he reflected on how far they had come. They still had a long way to go, but the first steps had been taken. His battle was no longer just him. It was an exercise with the possibility of changing the flow of history. As he ate, Levi looked around the table, at his family, at the people who had always supported him, who believed in him even when it seemed like the world was against him. They had weathered storms together, and they would continue to weather them together and together. For a long time, Levi has felt peaceful. The battle was far from the end, but for the first time, justice, equality, and respect were not only ideal, but also a reality that would be a reality for everyone. And he knew it was worth fighting for.